Same thing. Give it 30 seconds.
I should probably move the bullshit.
And welcome to Three Geeks and a Microphone podcast. I'm Dean.
I'm Art.
I'm Russ.
And today we are going to be discussing the 1986 film Sid and Nancy. So guys, when was the first time you became acquainted with this lovely little piece of cinema?
For me, it was high school. I watched it with my high school best friend. And then, yeah, it kind of went from there.
Okay. I think I saw it. Yeah, it's same. Probably in high school, I first became aware of it. And I think I rented it from like the video store just to check it out.
I saw it like 2 weeks ago. I had heard of it, but I've never been into the punk rock music too much. Yeah, I appreciate it and everything for what it was, but I never really was into the I knew of it.
So you're not going out and buying like, Sex Pistols albums, huh, Russ?
No, but I do have one now. I found it at the Goodwill. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna buy that.
Which one did you get?
Oh shoot, I'd have to look. I just bought it, probably about 2-3 years ago, and I just went in the box of miscellaneous stuff that I'll probably never listen to. But it has value, so you pick up stuff that mostly.
So Art, you really have an affinity for this movie, right? You said.
Yeah, I watched this movie more times than I care to think about. But again, it was because a friend of mine from high school, him and I started watching it, and then before long, we were like, let's start a band. And then, him and I got really into punk music, and he would dress up as Sid Vicious, and I'd dress up as Johnny Rotten, and we'd go sing and play guitar.
Cool. Very cool. So I figure let's get the review started. Art, why don't you want to hand it off?
Yeah. So the movie basically starts out with Gary Oldman as Sid Vicious. Well, it stars Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb. Chloe Webb plays Nancy. Nancy's, I'm probably gonna get this wrong. Spungen.
Thought it was Spurgeon.
It might be.
Yeah.
But anyway, the movie starts out. It shows Gary Oldman. The character Sid is in shock. He's smoking a cigarette and talking to the police detectives that have arrived on scene, but they don't tell you. All they're asking him is who killed Nancy. Now, if you're familiar with the Sex Pistols and you pay attention, they almost say who killed Bambi. In some versions of the film or some cuts. The movie continues on in a flashback kind of format, and it kind of goes through the story of how Sid met Nancy and kind of their lives together. It starts out with Sid and Johnny Rotten walking down the street, throwing rocks, smashing up cars, just doing insane kind of punk kind of things. And they're obviously drinking and discussing music, and it's about the time that Sid actually becomes involved with the Sex Pistols. It started out he was a super fan, and he was a friend of Johnny Rotten. And they basically go into what's a good way to put it, an apartment of a hooker that kind of runs a sex dungeon. And that's where they meet Nancy.
Okay, because she's working there, right? She's just hanging out. I don't remember.
She was just kind of hanging out, and I think she might have actually. I mean, they don't say it in the film, but in reality, I think that she was actually staying there or sleeping there, working as a hooker, something. But anyway, the movie kind of continues on with with their next show, and Nancy and for the life of me I can't think of the hooker's name. They go to see the show, and then everybody basically crashes back at kind of with during an after party at the hooker's flat.
Yeah, you got pillows and blankets everywhere, and
and Nancy comes along and actually tries to sleep with Johnny, and he's not having any of it, and then she kind of curls up next to Sid.
And Sid just rolls over and goes to sleep.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, he ends up meeting her again after the character in the film, the Rockhead, basically throws all her stuff out, and Sid and another friend of theirs is digging through her bag of stuff. She was supposed to go into an apartment and do a drug deal of some kind and bring back drugs for this other rocker, and the police show up and she gets left behind, and the rocker chucks all of her belongings out of his car.
Yep, they're all laying in the street.
Yeah, and Sid basically, in talking to her, tries talking her into getting him some drugs, and she takes some money from him. He wanted heroin. He'd never, according to that story, he hadn't tried it yet. And she basically gets him hooked on heroin at that point. Actually, she took off with his money, and he was waiting outside the pub in the rain, and she didn't show up. He didn't run into her for like a day or two.
Mm-hmm. And next time he meets her, he's in a bar.
Yeah.
Right. So let's pause right here for a second, because from what I've read, didn't Sid's mother get him hooked on H?
Yeah. The movie, Johnny Rotten's been online several times. It wasn't very accurate, but the portrayals of Chloe Webb as Nancy and Gary Oldman as Sid were unbelievably good.
Right.
In fact, Gary Oldman had dropped so much weight in order to play Sid. He'd actually gotten sick and was sick a few times on set.
Because I also read that Sid's mother, when Gary Oldman met her to talk about Sid, the necklace he's wearing, the locket necklace he's wearing in the movie, is actually Sid's. She gave it to him to wear in the film.
Yeah.
So they're at this bar, right? And who's his friend? I never caught the name.
I don't
did it say? Or
yeah, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. And the worst part is I should know this, but
because they end up scoring some H, and they go back to his place. It's his apartment. They go right. And
it's probably one of the more disgusting scenes of the film, between making love to Nancy. I mean, you see Sid going back and forth, throwing up in the toilet,
right, and
next to it,
and his buddy's puking in the damn bathtub.
Yeah,
it's like, no thanks.
Oh, come on! Doesn't that make you want to go out and use?
Yeah, anything that makes me puke and makes my cock get smaller. Yeah, give me more of that. But so this is the first time, according to the film anyways, this is the first time he's used.
Right. Yeah, like I said, the film wasn't completely accurate. In fact, there were a lot of things that were totally inaccurate. But like I said, there were some things, and Gary Oldman's portrayal of Sid Vicious was unbelievable. In fact, it actually brought Sid's real life mother to tears watching it, because he looked and acted so much like Sid Vicious. And while we're kind of at this point, there were if you're really into the Sex Pistols, there were a few movies like The Great Rock and Roll Swindle that came out. Now, while this is mostly self-serving to their manager, Malcolm McLaren, it does have some good video in it of Sid during some music videos that they filmed, and the My Way video that was in Sid and Nancy, the original video, is in this film.
I believe,
and you can run them side by side, and they're damn near perfect. I mean, Gary Oldman was amazing, and he should have won so many awards for this beyond what anything he would have gotten.
Right. Now, if I'm thinking right, you can find that. Can't you find the original My Way video on YouTube?
Yeah,
it's out there, right? Yeah.
In fact, I searched for it after watching the movie because I just wanted to see the original.
So let's keep going through. So they're at his apartment, right? And they try it for the first time. His buddy's like drooling on the floor while he's in bed with Nancy in the other room. Now, where do we go from here?
His buddy ends up waking up, playing guitar, wakes them up. And damn it, now I'm drawing a blank.
Isn't when they start, isn't it the aren't they in the recording studio next?
I think the boat incident came next.
Okay.
Where they're out. It's actually it was a
promotional thing, right?
Well, yeah. Well, it wasn't just a promotional thing. It was it was a British holiday for the Queen, and their way of celebrating it was to take these boats out and have a concert on the boat. And Malcolm had set up all kinds of or just limited media on there, like invitation only. And during this, Sid is actually is sitting on the boat, and one of the to interview him. And one of the better lines of the film actually happens in this scene where there's one of the pregnant groupies asking, what should she name her baby? And Sid kind of looks over and he's stoned out of his mind, says, "Bastard."
And I noticed, if you pay attention, she's pregnant. She mentions she's pregnant because of what you just said, but isn't she sucking on a bottle of Jack Daniels while she's sitting there?
And this is also the scene where Nancy gives Sid the locket. And he looks down, and he's like, "This is cool." And he asks about the key, and she kind of like, there is no key.
And I know there's the quick blurb with their manager and Johnny Rotten, in the manager's thing. He's talking to he's talking to like the camera guy, and he's like, "Where is he? Oh, he's in the bathroom puking." He's like, "Why can't he do it over the side? We get an action shot that way."
Yeah.
I'm like, what? So
that was probably one of the more accurate portrayals of Malcolm McLaren, because that man was all about chaos. Any bit of chaos that he could get on film or get recorded, he did. And that was kind of also what made Sid kind of what he was, because everywhere he went there was chaos.
Okay, didn't Malcolm say that if what is it, if Johnny is the look of punk, Sid is the attitude?
Yeah.
I don't know how necessarily accurate. I could see that, but because they started off, he owned a sex shop, did he not? Or a shop
Malcolm
called
did,
Sex.
yes.
Yeah. So we move on, and then they dock. Everyone's getting arrested because the cops show up, right?
Right.
And they're coming off the boat. And
Sid and Nancy just kind of walk off through the chaos. It's kind of weird. It's kind of a surreal kind of moment. Like they're stoned out of their mind. There's all kinds of things going on around them, and they're just kind of blundering through after that. And then they go to the telephone booth and she calls her parents and asks them for money.
Right.
Because her and Sid, she tells them they were just married.
Yep, she's trying to get a wedding gift, and
right.
Her parents aren't doing it.
Yeah. She wanted them, instead of sending like bedding or anything sensible. Yeah, she just wanted money, and finally she flips out.
Yep.
And starts smashing the phone and the windows and in the phone booth, and she tells Sid that they wouldn't give them any money because they would have probably just used it on drugs. And Sid replies, "Well, we would have."
He agrees with her.
Love that. It was just that part, one of my favorites, just when he goes, "We would."
Now from there, what's next? I just watched this last night too, and I'm drawing a complete blank. This is terrible.
Yeah, that movie actually kind of does that. I mean, you really kind of have to think about that one.
Yeah, it's the chaos of the movie, which is their life. It's overwhelming.
Oh, I agree. And I found, like I said, I'd seen this movie before, and even back, when I first saw it, probably like I said in the early 90s, I was still in high school. I found this movie really hard to watch. Because, I mean, obviously we know what happens to Sid, but you're watching this guy effectively kill himself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And for some reason, I have a hard time watching it. But I digress. Let's move on. So they're the phone booth, and then I'm getting it out of sequence. Is that when Nancy brings the pizza to the recording studio? Hello?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Dang it, now I can't think.
Yeah,
we can just do a base summation. We don't have to
go
scene by scene. So I do remember that particular scene itself, because they go into this I guess it's supposed to be a recording studio, but it's all run down and trashed, and she brings pizza, and from there, who's the guy in the hotel they go to visit? Him and Johnny Rotten.
They refer to him as the Rock Head. But there's been debates over the years whether that was actually supposed to be what the heck was his name? I'm drawing a blank and I can't think of his name.
It's all right. Isn't he supposed to be like an amalgam of like 2 or 3 different people?
Yeah. But for the purposes of the film is they call him the Rock Head. And
because he's staying in this really nice hotel suite, and it's just surreal. He's got this brocade room, with the paneling, and it's gorgeous in there, and he's sitting there lifting weights while Johnny's sitting on a settee sucking down a bottle of Jack Daniels, and he's telling him how, what is it?
Actually, we kind of actually, now that I think about it, we skipped over the part where Malcolm and his assistant basically decide that Sid had asked Malcolm for some money, and Malcolm said, well, all of your earthly needs are met by being in the band. What could you possibly need money for? And he responded, little things around the house. And they end up basically cutting him off money wise.
Okay.
Malcolm was actually trying to get him off heroin.
Now, is this when they had moved into, what was it, Sid's parents' place? That little apartment, and he's walking around in those Speedos?
Well, they were actually, actually, that was before this.
Okay.
He was living with his parents, and they end up getting thrown out of his parents' house, and they end up living with the hooker, and they end up sleeping in his kitchen, and then they end up sleeping in the hooker's kitchen, and Johnny goes to see Sid.
Yep.
To try to get Sid off of drugs. He says, let's go visit the Rockhead. He stopped doing drugs and drinking, and he's all the better for it.
Yep, I remember this now. Yep. And he reluctantly goes because he doesn't.
Yeah.
He didn't even want to get out of bed.
No. So they go visit the Rockhead, and sure enough, I mean, they show him, he's in there working out on an exercise bike. All of his assistants and things, except for one lady, were all working out, lifting weights, and so on. And Johnny kind of flops down on the bed with a bottle, and it almost immediately insults him.
Big surprise.
And then Nancy kind of in the back, or kind of flips out and insists that, well, Sid's a rock star, shouldn't they be living in a place like that? And so Malcolm gets them put in a hotel similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
And excuse me, if you're watching the film, when Malcolm and his assistant go visit Sid once they're living in a hotel like that, the guy that takes them up to the roof where Sid and Nancy are playing with cap guns, the bellhop was actually 10-pole Tudor.
Really?
Yeah, the guy that sang "Who Killed Bambi."
I never noticed that. Interesting. I mean, and you see the room that they absolutely destroy it.
Oh yeah, they demolished it, and they pretty much did that everywhere they went. That was why they got thrown out of his parents' house. They pretty much got thrown out of everywhere. And if it wasn't for them outright demolishing shit, it was Nancy that pretty much got them thrown out of everywhere because of her, for lack of a better term, bitchiness and insanity.
So now, at what point is it next when they're discussing the American tour?
Yes. And Nancy's trying to barter with Malcolm over Sid leaving, and her wanting to come along. And then they Malcolm and his assistant shoot back that nobody's taking an entourage with them. And the entire band is pretty much at that point sick of Nancy. They want her gone. Yep. And in reality, there was actually the record company and some of I think it was Malcolm's people, actually attempted to kidnap Nancy in real life.
Really?
And just get rid of her.
Good Lord.
Because they were so done with her.
She was like the punk version of Yoko Ono, I guess, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yoko Ono times 10.
Now, by the way, at what point do we see Courtney Love? I know she had initially. Didn't they want her to play?
She tried out. She did try out for the part of Nancy, but they thought she looked too old.
Oh, the irony.
She is in the film, but not until a little bit later. You don't actually see her until they're in New York.
Okay. Oh, the irony of that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, but and she's only in there briefly. But and we haven't quite gotten there yet. They do go on the American tour.
Mm-hmm.
Without Nancy. Nancy finally gives in. And then they kind of show Sid and Nancy together in their bedroom, they'd obviously, she wanted to continue having sex. He was tired. He wanted to go to sleep so he could make his appointment the next morning. And she kind of flips out on him, and he's had enough of it, and he leaves. And with her screaming, "What about the farewell drugs?"
Right. Because he was leaving the next morning to leave for the tour.
Right.
The farewell drugs. Wow.
Yeah. That's kind of an awesome concept in and of itself. But not that we're promoting heroin use.
Yeah, no, no kids. Don't use the wicked H. Don't do it.
But yeah, that was kind of an interesting concept. But yeah, anyway, they go on tour, and Sid kind of you see him starting to break down. He's heavily drinking, doing drugs. At one point, he gets the crap beat out of him by some Texans on a railroad track, and Malcolm saves him from that.
The Sex Pistols in Texas. That's
yeah.
Those two words should not go together.
Well, yeah, you actually see them at one point. I think they're actually in a country bar.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Playing. But yeah, you see him after a while. He's like cutting on himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's got like a room full of different girls, and he's carving Nancy's name into his chest. And you see him on stage, and his face is all bloody, and his chest is all tore up, and Johnny does the famous, "Do you feel you've been cheated, or do you feel like you've been cheated?" speech.
Now, this is where I know at one point he goes and he calls Nancy from a phone booth, right?
Yeah, and she's actually working at the bordello.
Yep.
Now with their hooker friend, who by the way was in Superman 2.
She was
Ursa.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is and we actually skipped over a part when Johnny goes to visit them to take them to go see the Rockhead. The guy hanging by chains from the hooker ceiling. Did you guys catch who that was?
It
was Doug Bradley, the guy that played Pinhead.
Oh, the irony there.
Yeah. There were so many little things about this movie like that are kind of going on or in the background, that really kind of, at least for me anyway, always made this movie worth watching.
That's okay. So you got Pinhead tied up from the ceiling
with chains,
but with chains from Ursa from Superman 2.
Yeah.
That in of itself could be a movie.
Right. Yeah, what actually happens in the fandom zone after dark?
Oh.
Pinhead had such sights to show her.
You solved the box, we came.
Yeah.
So he's in the States. He just gets off the phone with Nancy. Now, is it this point they go to New York?
Not yet. She doesn't come to visit him. He actually overdoses during the tour, and
that's right.
In the hospital. You see him walking into a party. I can't remember if it was in Chicago or New York, but he basically falls through the plate glass door.
Whew.
He was sick. He ended up in the hospital. And basically that's the point where they show where the band basically breaks up.
Yep.
Johnny doesn't want to get stuck with him. Paul and Steve end up going off on their own. And a lot of what they actually do at that point ends up in the video or in the film, Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
So that intervening point is in the Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
Yeah, well, that kind of after what they do literally when they leave that hospital is basically kind of shown in the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, kind of the next thing they do.
Which is what?
they end up doing some of their own music. They end up going to Belson and some other places. They basically go travel for a bit, play music. From the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, it looked like they had a pretty good time.
Okay.
They made some music videos, and then they came back a few years later, and then Steve Jones and Paul Cook assisted with making the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. But all of the footage in there of Sid was obviously prior to Sid dying.
Right.
Because by the time they made that movie, Sid had already been dead for a couple of years. But anyway, the band breaks up. The assistant basically tells Sid that he's a free agent. He can do whatever he wants. He ends up back in the hospital. He gets on a plane. He starts drinking and doing some other stuff and ends up back in the hospital. And then at that point is when Nancy comes to visit him on Christmas. Or you assume that it's around Christmas.
Okay. Okay. This is when they move into the Hotel Chelsea, right?
Not quite, but very soon they end up going in. Well, yeah, actually they do. They're in their first room at the Hotel Chelsea, and then they go visit her family, and her family does everything that they can to get her and Sid out of the house.
Okay.
I don't know why they'd be such lovely house guests.
Yeah,
right.
Completely drunk, trashed out of their minds. It's Sid at one point, they're actually in another room with I don't know if there were Nancy's younger siblings or other relatives, cousins, but they're in there playing guitar, and then Sid kind of just drifts off and goes to sleep.
Bad case of the nods, I guess.
Yeah, the whole time he's got like no shirt on. They're sitting at the dinner table, and the grandfather asked Sid at one point during the meal, what are your intentions toward Nancy? And he goes, well, first thing Monday, or Mr. Grandpa, sir, Monday morning, where I'm going to the methadone clinic. And they're all just kind of looking at him.
Well, I guess that's a positive, right?
Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah, they basically do everything they can to get them out of the house. They get them out of the house, and then they go back to the Hotel Chelsea. They fall asleep stoned in the room, and the room basically catches on fire. So they end up getting moved out of one room and into another room, which is actually the room that that Nancy's killed in.
No, I know at one point when they're laying there in the room, I guess it's their dealer comes in and says, they gives them a score, and he says, you guys are doing all the H on the island. I had to go up one side of New York to the other just to find this stuff for you.
Yeah.
I don't know why that stuck in my mind for some reason, but it's like, were they doing that much?
They did a lot. I mean, probably historic or epic levels. They probably did so much that there's probably none left on the planet.
My question is, where was the money coming from to pay for it?
Well, they do show that he was doing some solo gigs with some other groups.
Okay.
And they did show that Nancy was out with some different different women, and that's actually in one of those instances is where you actually see Courtney Love.
They're in a bar.
Yeah, they're trying to put together like bands or gigs at different bars and different clubs for Sid to do. And I think some of his money that was actually where some of his money came from.
Because if I remember correctly, didn't Sid say or someone had said they were robbed of like 30 grand or something?
That was later.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of when, or the night that Nancy was murdered. But again, that actually wasn't really in the movie. It was they kind of show the if we skip ahead a little bit, they show like Sid and Nancy in that room, and she's going through like fits of depression, and she gets Sid to uh have like a suicide pact with her, where they'll both commit suicide and go out in a blaze of glory, or that he'll do her and then himself, and then he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't kill her.
Okay.
And they kind of show the dealer coming in and kind of helping himself to some of their money and other things they had laying around.
Because they were both passed out at this point, right?
Yeah.
Kind of makes you wonder, did Sid actually do it or did the dealer do it?
Well, in the film, they basically imply that they had an altercation and that she kind of fell on the knife.
Yep.
37 times. It didn't really, that was a joke, but you know, that she basically kind of ran into the knife. And then they did not realizing that she was that injured, or that she was basically bleeding out. They went to bed and she was continuing to bleed out, and then she gets up and collapses in the bathroom. And then we're back kind of where the movie started, where the police are questioning him. And then they finally release him out of jail. And then he goes and gets a pizza and ends up dancing with some kids. And
yep. I will say this, it's probably one of the best endings I've seen of a movie like this. The way that was shot.
Yeah, where the taxi comes up and she's in it in the white gown, and they get in it and ride off together.
Yep, and then it just fades with that empty street.
Right.
Now, in reality, when he got out, he went to his mom threw a party for him, right?
Yeah, he was in and out a couple of times. There's actually kind of a lot of mixed different stories out there that he was in for 90 days, he was in for 30 days, that he got out and went right back in, then came out after another 30 or 90 days. But at some point, yeah, his mom took him to an apartment of a friend's, and they had a party, and that was where he did the fatal doses of heroin. I think it was, what was that, February 22nd, 1978, or 79 rather.
Mm-hmm. In essence, his mother gave him the heroin to kill him.
Yeah, that didn't come out until she was actually on her deathbed and she confessed to it. Because Sid, her story was that, or the story that went around then, this was in the early to mid 90s, that he couldn't handle what he may or may not have done, or not knowing if he killed Nancy, or basically life without her, or the threat of going to prison, whether he did it or not. So, because apparently at one point while he was in prison, he'd been raped and further sexually assaulted.
Really? I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, while he was detoxing.
Ugh.
Because when he came out, they basically in several of the interviews since then, they basically said that he had detoxed while he was in prison or in jail, and then he came out and he was clean. And one of the stories was that the amount of heroin that he had done was what he had used to do pretty regularly. It wasn't, it was enough to kill an elephant, but he was his body had become accustomed to that. But after detoxing, it basically killed him.
Which would make sense. I mean, if you're clean like that, you're going to want to start with lower doses than what you were doing, because it builds a tolerance.
Right. And some of his friends had actually tried doing that with him that evening. They'd given him small doses, but then his mom's confession was that she actually gave him the fatal dose a really large dose of it. Because he couldn't live with himself or the guilt of not, or he had issues with not knowing whether he killed Nancy or if he did do it, because he himself didn't even know. And in several of the other some of the online like YouTube videos about it, or some of the documentaries that are on YouTube, have said things like they believe that it was actually the drug dealer that actually worked in that hotel that killed Nancy and took all the money, or took the $30,000.
I had heard that. Now, do you think, I thought I had read somewhere that someone had speculated that since he couldn't live with Nancy, that his death was like a weird, for lack of a better word, a suicide pact between him and his mom. That his mom wanted to put him out of his misery in a way.
Yeah, that was, that, and like I said, there were that she didn't want him living, did not want him living with the guilt. Was basically one of the stories, that she herself didn't want him living with the guilt, or that he couldn't live with the guilt, and asked her to do it.
That's fucked up. So what do you think, though?
I honestly, I don't know. None of us were in the room when it happened. Hell, I was barely a year old when it happened. I don't know. I could actually see that she was such a toxic person that where she could have pissed him off bad enough that he would have stabbed her. But I can also see where just as easily it could have happened, like in the film where they had an altercation and he did it in accidentally. But I don't, there were a lot of unanswered questions about it too. There was a story that he had gotten up early that morning, gone to the methadone clinic, came back, also on top of methadone, did his morning amount of heroin, and was passed out when it had, during the time that it would have had to have happened. And that the police coming in actually woke him up. And they never actually, it's never really been explained who called the police. And I could be wrong about that, but obviously somebody had to have called the police.
Right.
So
and someone knew that she was injured.
Yeah.
Who knows? It could have been Sid himself and he just passed out.
Right.
What do you think, Russ?
I really, it's kind of like one of those who shot Kennedy things. You're never going to really know the true answer. And it's just very fascinating, really. The whole, I was shocked to see how toxic Nancy was. Like I was sitting there watching the movie and I was ready to kill her in the first 5 minutes, not that I would really go kill someone. I'm just like, So I could easily see where it was a drug dealer. I could easily see where it was Sid. Shoot, maybe she heard herself on the radio and stabbed herself. Or not on the radio, but listen, a recording of herself, or maybe she had a moment of awareness that
moment of clarity.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible person, and then just goes to town stabbing herself. Not really. I'm bad joke, but I actually had a hard time watching the movie because of Nancy. If the actress, you guys had said that, I know chatting with Art, that it was very, from what he has read and done research, which I've not done. So I'm going by what, because that she was very very good at portraying Nancy. Yeah. I feel sorry for Sid, man.
And it's like the two were feeding off each other. You know, they were both dysfunctional and they were feeding off each other.
Yeah, it's almost like in her messed up, twisted, toxic personality, it was like one of the only people that seemed to need Sid. And that's what Sid wanted, was someone that needed him. Where it seemed almost like everyone else, you kind of like, well, you know, like I know in the movie they made a comment about how his personality, his punk, was the attention getting of the Sex Pistols, but yet he was the expendable member of the group, where it's kind of like, if he didn't show up to play, the music didn't suffer. They didn't need him.
No, they didn't actually. In fact, I think it was Guy Wakefield that actually played on all of their albums. He was actually the one that played.
Mm-hmm. I know there's only a handful of songs where Sid actually played on.
Yeah, but everything that was recorded in a studio was, I believe, Guy Wakefield.
Yeah, so I could see where, if he knew that, he obviously had to have known that all the albums, how unneeded he must have felt, even though he probably, with his drug addiction and everything, was not fully aware. But there must have been part of him that knew that, and Nancy was this only person that actually needed him, almost like, and in a way, now watching the movie after she was dead and he wanted the pizza and dancing with the kids, it was almost like he had that moment of clarity that life was peaceful. I felt peace watching that. It's like almost like this massive storm cloud of confusion throughout the entire movie, all of a sudden lifted when you see him eating the pizza and dancing with the kids. And given then she shows up in his dream sequence or whatever that was.
But you got to remember, though, there's a little hiccup in that, because as he's eating the pizza, doesn't he flip the table over when he walks out?
No. Yeah. Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah.
But I mean, he's Sid Vicious.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, that was expected.
Yeah. Well, one of the funnier scenes in the film, though, is when Sid and Nancy and one of the other groupies are walking back to the hotel, and they walk through that park, and those kids are beating up on the smaller kid. Mm. And Sid starts to break them up, and the kids look up at him and they're like, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Sid Vicious." And all those kids' eyes bug out and they just run every direction.
Yeah, I love that part. It's like you see this guy who's a toxic punk, known for his violent outbursts, defending this kid. I think it kind of shows more, and that's one thing. Gary Oldman, his portrayal, I love his acting anyway, almost in everything I've seen him in. But he made me like Sid Vicious, even if he was a character that you're not supposed to necessarily like, unless because he's supposed to be that toxic punk rocker.
Well, he gave him humanity. You actually feel sympathy for him.
Yeah, it was, that part was amazing. It's like such a difference. You have sympathy and compassion, and for Sid, it's like you want. Okay, not to sound too weird. It's like you wanted to take him in and be like, "Hey, let's get through this together. Let's get you some help. Let's make you better. Let's give you what life should be about." And then you got Nancy, where you're like, "Come on, train, run over her. Come on, where's Lightning? Someone kill her." You know, it was such an emotional roller coaster watching this movie.
Maybe that's why I have such a hard time with it. It's not just the drug use, because now that you mention that, like when he's dancing with the kids at the end, he kind of looks up and he smiles for a second, and it's a genuine "I'm happy" smile.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's
You
like
know?
he has true joy, where it was like before you wanted to see him have that, but it's like Nancy was there. It's like a turd you can't pass.
Really got to strain.
Yeah, their whole relationship was definitely the blueprint for like the world's most toxic relationship possible.
I mean, so she died. Now, how long was it? Was it just a couple months, or was it a year between Nancy's death and Sid's death? I don't remember. I looked it up, but I didn't write it down.
It was less than a year, wasn't it?
I think so.
I think wasn't it like 4 or 5 months?
That sounds right.
But I'm actually looking it up.
Well, because the reason I bring it up, I mean, was if he was that racked with guilt that in essence he bring up that theory we had that his mom was helping him out in this.
Yeah. Okay. She died on October 12th, 1978, and Sid Vicious died. Give me just a second here.
Mm-hmm.
He died February 2nd, 1979.
So a couple months.
Yeah. So we had October, November, December, January, February, about 5 months later.
Okay. How old was Sid when he died? Did he hit?
He was in his early 20s.
Is he a member of the 27 Club?
No, he wasn't that old. I think he was like 23.
Yeah. Okay. Somewhere between 21 and 23.
Huh.
Well, let's see. He was born May 10th, 1957. So
do the math.
So he was about 22.
Okay. Yep, that's what I got. So all in all, okay, this is different than the other movies we've done. So how would you rate this?
As far as like acting goes, I would, and I mean, especially Gary Oldman, I would definitely give this a 10.
A 10?
And even the story, I mean, even though it wasn't, 100% accurate, there's no way you're ever going to get a movie that's 100% accurate. I mean, even newer ones like Bohemian Rhapsody, or that abysmal Elton John movie. I mean, none of those were completely 100% historically accurate. It's pretty much impossible. Even the Doors movie, you couldn't do a completely 100% accurate movie. But as far as like rock and roll movies go, granted this is punk rock, but as far as movies like that go, this was definitely one of the better ones. If for no other reason that it had better actors in it, and it had so many moments in it, that you unless you're paying attention, you won't catch. Like Doug Bradley hanging from a ceiling by chains in a scene, or Ten Pole Tudor, playing a bellhop in it.
Like I would never have caught the Doug Bradley thing had you not mentioned it.
Yeah,
I would have not caught that at all.
Or the fact that the whore in the film is Ursa, or is played by the actress that played Ursa in Superman 2.
Mm-hmm. I knew she looked familiar, but I couldn't place her.
That's what was happening with me. And that's also when I watched and I saw Nancy, like I was already telling both of you, right away I recognized her as the woman from Ghostbusters 2 who was on the did my picture just vanish?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
The alien abductee.
Yeah. It could have been, Bill Murray's guest on his psychic show, and it was hard because in fact I almost wonder if she did such a good job at playing Nancy and being so annoying, if it didn't hurt her career to the point where people wouldn't cast her because they thought she was just an annoying actress. Because you see, but it really, that scene in Ghostbusters 2, because I've seen Ghostbusters 2 so many times, it almost took away from this movie for me, because I kept seeing her as, well, it could have been a room on a shuttle that made look like the Holiday Inn. And so every time she'd make a certain like face in the movie, I'd be like, it's the girl from Ghostbusters, and it would just suck me out of it. Luckily, Gary Oldman's performance was so awesome that I was able to keep watching. Otherwise, I might have actually just turned it off, to be honest, because of the association with Ghostbusters 2. I love Ghostbusters 2. It's just that it was so hard to.
Right. Gary Oldman kept you grounded in that universe, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like I said, how would you guys rate it? You know, we always rate films, 0 to 10. Art gave it a 10.
This one, I really can't honestly give it I don't know what to give it, because it's like part of me wants to give it a higher rating, another one wants to give it like a low rating. I also have had family members that have had addiction issues, so some of it came out to be way too real. It's like, I know people that are kind of like Nancy, and I know I haven't killed them, I haven't stabbed them. The thought has crossed my mind, but I would never act on those thoughts. I think it just shows that I'm human, that we all have our moments where we're like, I don't know. I'll give it a 5, because it goes right in the middle. Gary Oldman definitely is a 10. There's no doubt about it. It's like, wow. The gal who played Nancy, if I hadn't seen Ghostbusters 2, I would probably given her a better, it's just, her face is so animated. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that when you see that face on Ghostbusters 2, because it's such an iconic part, and then you see it in Sid and Nancy, the way my brain works is it just sucked me out of it. The story is good. It's incoherent at times, because that's what happens with drug life. Not that I've never even been drunk. You're talking to the guy who's never even tried pot. Even my 84-year-old dad has now been stoned with THC, thanks to some, where I'm like, whoa, even my dad's more knowledgeable than I am in drug use.
Wow.
And he's the guy you saw scooting around in the back earlier, if you're wondering. I'm almost at a loss for words. It's a movie that I loved and I hated at the same time.
I could see that. I mean, like I said, this, for me anyways, I find it very, at least the drug use anyhow, I find it very hard to watch, because he's killing himself. But as a whole, I probably would give it probably like an 8.7 as a whole. Gary Oldman a 9.4 for his performance. Now, Nancy, I can't, what was her name? The actress's name?
Chloe Webb.
Yep. I don't know if I've ever, except for the Ghostbusters piece, I don't think I've ever seen her in anything else.
She's actually been in a lot of stuff. She was in in a couple episodes of 2.5 Men, where she basically flipped out in a restaurant, very much like Nancy would have. She was in Practical Magic and a few other films.
Yeah,
I
gave my score, so go ahead.
I was gonna say, I almost feel bad for her, because you can tell she's a talented actress, and it's almost like I can't help to wonder if this role in Sid and Nancy, because how toxic It's just like actresses and actors get typecast all the time. And like Art just said, I've seen some, I've probably seen her in other things. But like, what was that TV show that you said, Two and a Half Men?
Yeah.
Charlie Sheen.
Even you were just saying in that role, she played a person that would flip out. It's almost like they typecast her as the flip out crazy person. Even Ghostbusters 2, her role was the,
Unless that was the only thing she could actually play.
It could be.
That is definitely plausible, but like, even didn't Mark Hamill at one point say, except for his voice acting, he was stuck as Luke Skywalker?
Yeah.
And that's another thing, kind of little sidetrack. It's so strange how you can have some actors that that they played another role, but it doesn't mess with what you're seeing them in now. When you're like, if you watch Harrison Ford, he's Han Solo and he's Indiana Jones, but when you're watching those two, you're not thinking, oh, that's Han Solo, or oh, that's Indiana Jones. And then you can see him in something like Regarding Henry, and you're not thinking of Han Solo or Harrison Ford while watching him. It's just, whereas
I would chalk that up to he's a good actor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
and that's where I see her, and I was like, woman in the crazy show with Bill Murray from Ghostbusters 2.
So how do you guys rate this? Is it a definite, if you've never seen it, is it a definite watch?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's definitely worth watching at least one time.
I would definitely say it depends on the person. There's some people that could not and should not watch this movie. I would definitely say if they have a heroin addiction and they're in recovery, don't watch it, because there's too many, what they would say, triggers. You'd want to stay away from that, because it would probably just bring back a lot of trauma. If you're someone who has family and loved ones, it might be good for you to actually see this, because it gives you more of an insight of what their life as an addict would be.
Or also, if you're thinking about getting treatment, maybe watch this, because you could end up like this.
Yeah. I would say I would recommend it to 80% of the population at least one time.
Okay. So is there anything else we're going to be discussing on this topic, gentlemen?
Not that I can think of. I'm actually looking it up right now again.
Yeah. When I first watched it, I was like, in fact, I was telling Dean, it's like, man, Art loved this movie. Art really liked it, because I was like, oh man, I wanted to like hate this movie. I hated the movie after watching it, but after it sunk in and I did watch it a second time just a few days later, I enjoyed it more. I didn't know the in-depth, as you probably noticed. I was just sitting there listening most of the time, because I was listening to your guys' take on it, because you've seen it longer and more often than I have.
Until we brought it up, it had been a couple of years since excuse me. It had been a couple of years since I had seen this. And then when we brought it up, I ended up digging out a copy of it. So I've watched it 3-4 times since we decided we were going to go with it. Last night being the soonest, but it was a good flick. It just, there's parts of it, like I said, I had a hard time with. So anything else?
I just had to digest it. After the first viewing, I know after letting it soak in and look at it as what more of an artistic and true life scenario than just a movie, I liked it more. If it was just a movie, like I pop in on a Sunday afternoon to kill some time, because there is definitely a difference between this movie and something like a good old Chuck Norris action flick, for sure. And
oh, sure.
So it's kind of like where you have some movies are like, boom, I love that. Oh, that's awesome. Like I was with Blue Thunder. I'm like, oh, pure 80s cheese, man.
Invasion USA.
Yeah. Where you just instantly you just connect with it because you're so disconnected with it. Where this has more true life and it takes a little bit more to sink in what they've done.
Is more grounded in reality than, say, a Blue Thunder or an Invasion USA.
Well, yeah, I guess. I still know that Chuck Norris is out there protecting us from millions of terrorist attacks because he just knows where they're happening. He stops them before the news even gets there. You know, like right now, there was going to be a horrible terrorist attack, a terrorist attack. Chuck Norris just stopped it while we're doing this podcast.
Him in his wheelchair. So anything else you're going to add, guys? Art, you got anything else?
No, I'm good.
Russ?
Oh, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we will catch you on the next one. And you can